session, as the kind lady just told you. So this will also be posted on our YouTube channel about a week after today's session. So if you know anybody who wasn't able to join us today, please direct them to our YouTube page. And of course, please join us for our next event as well if you are not already registered. And that one is going to be on the 17th, Wednesday the 17th at the same time at 11 o'clock. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is exciting. I've done a number of workshops with the library in the past. We tried at the university to extend some of our resources out into the community. So I've actually been down to the library, and we had a great room one time doing a startup workshop. But this is kind of fun because I think in pandemic times, and certainly professional careers, and in the information age, quite frankly, what you're seeing is a lot more attention paid to your career. You're not staying someplace for 20 years, so you do have to manage your career. So this workshop is all about career management and how you go about really bringing yourself to market and having the career that you want. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to guide us through some material, some PowerPoint material to help the conversation along. Again, we're talking about career management. And then at different points in time, I will stop so that you can ask questions. I'll introduce you to 4 elements of framework for thinking about your career and how to bring your skill set to market. And then some tactical things about just interviewing and LinkedIn and stuff like that. And all of that over the course of the hour, I think will round out a very good session. But most importantly, and what I find as a presenter, as a moderator, is that questions are where the value is. And I'm always excited to answer direct questions from my audience. So there are a couple of ways we're going to do that. Given that we have some time constraints, I'm going to encourage you to put your questions into the chat stream so that together we can pull those questions out, read them aloud to the entire audience. If there's time, depending on how we're going along, we may take some live questions, but I think there's a great deal more value in writing the question down, if at all possible, so that we maximize the use of time where you're getting value. And so we'll work it that way. So encouragement to you, put your questions in the chat stream. I'm now going to switch over. I'm going to share my screen and show you some material, and then we're going to talk about career management all through. I will take breaks so that we can stop and ask some questions. And there are no questions. I might actually share a few that I've gotten in the past, but we'll move along at a nice steady pace. So again, my name is Mark Hardie. I'm actually the director of the Entrepreneur Innovation Center at Framingham State University. I teach entrepreneurship, and then part of my career includes career coaching at Harvard Business School and at MIT's Sloan School of Management, and then a small private practice as well. I really enjoy career coaching. I think this is a great time in our history to sort of be focused on manage your career and get better at pursuing the career that you want in the way you want to. So let's get going. Bear with me. I'm going to launch Screensaver, and with Zoom, it's always always interesting to see just sort of what they've changed the interface to look like. There we go. I believe all of you at this point are seeing Career Management Workshop, Mark Hardie, Career Coach at Harvard Business School. That's the material that I'm going to go through today. I just got a thumbs up, so we're good to go. So let's proceed. Again, please don't be shy. You can ask questions in the chat stream. I will stop and take them, and we'll move along quite smoothly. So career management, by my definition, is proactive steps taken to direct and accelerate your career path and your career advancement. You've got to take control of your career versus simply complete a document like a resume or a cover letter and then click a button and apply for something. And then while you're working, sort of sit back and let career and life come at you, quite frankly. The most important tool you have in career management, quite frankly, is communication. How are you talking to the various parties that are involved in the career, in the hiring, in the job seeking process? What are they hearing from you? And are they understanding who you are and what you might bring to an organization in the ways that you want them to? So we focus quite a bit on working with, in my case at HBS or at MIT, working with students and graduates around communicating an effective narrative. How do you talk about yourself? And honestly, you don't get a lot of time to do that. And yet you're dealing with professionals who do it all the time, your HR departments and your recruiters, who that's all they do. So they're really good at interviewing, and yet you do it relatively infrequently, and you wonder why you struggle or you get a little bit nervous. It's because, quite frankly, it's not something that is day to day or on a regular basis in your life. Instead, it's something that happens periodically. That period may shorten in that you interview maybe every few years or several years, but again, they're the pros, you're not. So this is where you want to really take some time to focus and learn the skills and the techniques that allow you to get better. So career management, taking proactive steps, communication is your most valuable tool. All right, today we're going to talk about career elements. Think about this as a framework, as a structure in which you put your narrative, your details, so that whenever you talk to somebody, there's some structure in your conversation. You're talking about certain things, and they're hearing those things in a way that allows you to present yourself the best. A framework for career management and, quite frankly, life decisions. But today we're going to focus very much on career. What is your identity? What is the community in which you find yourself the most productive, the most successful? What are the necessities, the things you need from a job, from a company, from an employer that'll allow you to be successful? And what is the horizon? What is that place you're headed toward professionally? Where do you want to get to? What does success mean to you? The text here talks a little bit more expansively about life, but for the purposes of our conversation today, let's think about these elements in the context of your career. Who am I? How do I identify myself? Where and in what group or community or tribe or team, where am I the best? Where can I function at my highest level? What do I need from a company besides a paycheck? Quite frankly, you will not be working for free. You will be getting paid in life. And so beyond that, what is it that you need? And then when you step back and think about your professional career, where is it that you are going? What do you see in your own mind's eye is out there and would allow you to live your career and your life to its fullest? Happy that you're doing the work that you're doing. All right, I'm going to go through each of these in more detail. We'll stop at the end of each so that I can take some questions. It might not be immediately obvious to you what questions to ask, and as we roll along, you'll start to ask more, but I'll try to pull that all together so that we get a good sense for how to use a framework. This framework comes from a book written by Timothy Butler. He's a professor at Harvard University. You can find it on the bookstores and on in Google, etc. Tim Butler, you see the 4 elements there underneath the graphic, and it's helpful. It actually has some good examples in it. So if you're thinking about reading a little bit more about your career or on a Kindle or by paper, then go ahead and take a look at that book. Framework for career management. So let's dig in. Use the chat stream to ask any questions you might have, but let's start with identity, your first career element. Identity is really your ability to tell someone who you are. In an interview process, typically they're going to ask you to walk through your resume, but that's not so much who you are as what you've done. So you want to learn how to talk about yourself as a professional who brings a set of skills. And so what roles or experiences, what were you doing or what have you done that identifies who you are? A title is not your identity. You're not just a manager. You're not just a manager at a certain company. You might be someone who can do analytical work. You might be someone who can run a store. It's important to understand that identity is more than just title and company, which is what typically is in your resume. Title, company, stuff you did, but that isn't necessarily you. And then when you're out networking or talking to people to try to learn more about opportunities in the market, it's not in your best interest to simply default to my last job was. Because for many of you, the next job may not necessarily be the same as the last job. You want to advance, you want to do different things. And so identity is critical. You've got to know who you are. What skills are you bringing? What skills did you gain from past work that allow you to now go out and get a different job, a new job, work on something else? So the name that you might give to this, or for that matter, the full sentence that you write, we call it a declarative, is something that you use to help others understand who you are. What name would you give to your role, or who you might, or what you might perform at a company? What sentence might you write? For me, I'm an operating professional. So I work at companies, I help companies build things and grow the company by helping put structure in place. I'm not a sales professional. I'm not a doctor or a surgeon. I'm an operating executive. And so when I talk to people about who I am, I describe myself as that. And then I might go into my narrative and talk about where I got that skill, what am I known for doing quite well, and why, when I'm talking to you, I have a way of describing myself so that you understand me outside the context of past jobs, of past roles. What is the nature of my talent? It's not an easy thing to do. It's not something that you write it once and it's perfect. It actually evolves over time. And so what you want to begin to do is start to craft, to write down, to be able to say in a conversation to somebody, I am something. I am a sales professional. I am you can be a barista, quite frankly, at a coffee shop if you're very early in your career, or I'm a marketing person, or I am a product person, or I'm a coder, I'm a developer. But you really have to be able to talk about yourself articulately in the first person so people can begin to understand how you might contribute to a company, right? So that identity piece is very critical, because you've got to be able to, no matter who you're talking to, tell them about you beyond simply pointing to the jobs you've had in the past as a way to identify yourself. They are part of it, but they aren't all of it. And if you want to remove some of the bias that creeps in when someone looks at your resume and sees a company that you work for and has some opinion of that company, and so now you're fighting their bias toward that company, you want to be very good at describing who you are, what it is you do, and what you're good at. I often say arrows in the quiver, right? What do I do? What are my talents that I want to bring to a company? And the best way to express that is to have a complete sentence. I am something, someone. I'm a type of professional. And the way I support that declarative is I tell you a little bit about my past. At this particular place of employment, I worked on new business development, or I worked on a new product, and that's where I developed those skills. What are your core talents? How might you bring them to a new company? How do you describe them in conversation, in interview, in any discussion, even in writing when you're using either a cover letter or an email, etc. Identity, that's the first piece of the framework. How do I identify myself? What's the next role for me when I identify myself? Because that next role follows my interests, takes advantage of my signature skills. Number one piece of the framework, or number one element, is identity. So I'm going to stop here and give you a chance to ask some questions. Feel free to either put them in the chat stream, or we might even be able to handle them as live. And so let's take questions. I see one in the chat stream, so why don't we go ahead and take that?
It took me a minute to unmute. In the context of switching career paths, how can we write a strong, positive declarative that encompasses what you want to be and also what you've done so far?
Excellent question. We all very often in our careers move from one specialty or one industry to another. And so we often describe it as switching. I personally don't like the term pivot. Please don't use that around me. You're actually making conscious decisions to advance your career as opposed to turning around and going backwards. So let's think about, how do we transition? And so how do we write a declarative that captures that? I think the important thing when you're doing your declarative, when you're identifying yourself, is to focus on key skills, things you like to do or want to do versus simply talking about a role or a title. Don't call yourself a marketing manager when in fact you're interested in moving more toward analytics and evaluation of tools and technologies on the web. All of us at different points in our career move from one area of expertise or specialty to another. And in that transition, your best strategy is to really clearly identify the skills that are going to translate, being analytical, being willing to do the math, being someone who's very creative, someone who can design or showcase image or things like that, someone who's very interpersonal, can interact and work with others in potentially a sales role where once they were in a more internal managing role, someone who is very, very good at even the cross collaboration within a company, reaching out to their fellow workers, putting together meetings and sessions and running those sessions. Learn to identify the skills that are applicable in more places than your current job, and then use them to identify yourself. When you write a narrative, you should think about that narrative as calling out skills. When you write a declarative, talk about who you are and what you want to do or be, versus simply referring to your past, so that people know the direction that you're going in. And then when you get a chance to talk, you walk them through where you've been, who you are now, and where you're going. I don't mean in any way imply it's real easy. That's a good question, because it can be challenging to try to craft that, but you have to work on it so that you do inform anybody or the audience where you're going and not where you've been. I call that offense versus defense. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as we get later in the presentation. All right. Good question. Maybe time for one more. Is that the same one that we're seeing in the chat?
Just the one so far. Anyone
Okay.
else? If you do send a question, please be sure that you select send to everyone so that we can all see your questions. Sometimes it's easy to accidentally send it to only one person.
Okay, let's move on. We're going to do our second. I see a question that's popped up. Go ahead and take that question.
What if your quote unquote career has been volunteer work?
So if your career has been volunteer work, that's still work, okay? So it isn't that you've volunteered and you don't want to go and do a 4-pay job. You simply volunteered in the past as a way to either build skill or showcase an ability. Volunteer work showcases a variety of abilities, a willingness to contribute your time and effort to a cause. And so you want to really break down the things that you did as a volunteer, what drove you to volunteering, and how some of those same skills or key capabilities can now be used in a role, a professional role where you're paid. So when you list what it is that you volunteered for, some of the things you did as a volunteer, the time commitment that you made, perhaps some of the things you got out of it, quite frankly, how did it make you feel? What is it about it that kept you going back or kept you doing it? Those all become part of your declarative and narrative, and you use those to talk to someone in an interview or in a professional capacity about what it is you want to do next. Volunteering is certainly a good way to develop skills, and then take those skills and move them toward or take them toward a professional career. All right, I see a third one, but we're going to move over to our next framework element, and then we'll take more questions as we get through. The community is important, and actually it hints back at our volunteer question. I like to talk about community, and I had a client who said, oh, my tribe. Community is really when you've been working or volunteering for that matter, the people around you that allowed you to be successful, can you describe them? Write their names down or write some of the adjectives about them that allowed you to work, to be effective, to be successful, to work at a very high level. So why is this important? Because a lot of times in interviews, you're being asked about challenges with a team or a problem that you had with a coworker. And a lot of what that gets at is whether or not you understand who around you allows you to be successful. What is the right complement of people in your professional career that allow you to succeed? Are you somebody that works independently, an individual contributor who complements the work of others? Are you somebody who's very team-oriented and maybe you're right-brained or left-brained, so you're analytical or you're artistic and you want to work with someone who's the exact opposite so that together you produce a good output, right? Community is important because very rarely are we working in isolation. Most of us, many of us, are going to work in companies. Those companies are full of other people. You join a group, you have a manager. Do you like to have a manager who wants to meet on a regular basis, or do you like a manager that just sort of leaves you alone and comes and talks to you infrequently? So what I like people to do when I work with them as a client is to think about community as those individuals in your past that you can point to and write their name down that was a colleague that you had who had similar skills and together you fed off of each other, or a boss that was extremely patient and that allowed you to come into work without anxiety and know that you had a good rapport with your boss and could work at a very high level. Maybe some of you, as you get to mid and late career, enjoy working with younger coworkers because they come with creativity, they're fun to mentor in an ad hoc way, you're comfortable with a mix of ages in your group, it makes you feel alive, it makes you feel responsive. And so you want to keep track of, in your mind, in notes, be prepared in interviews to be able to talk about the times and the people around you or your community, your professional community, that help you to be successful. And ask questions about the company you're interviewing with. Who would I work with? How big is my team? What skills do some of my teammates have? Or when you're actually in later rounds of interviews, asking some of those potential coworkers how they like to work and what are their skills. So you see here, examples of a creative coworker or a very detail-oriented teammate where you're more of a big picture person. Community is important because companies have employees. Companies vary in size from a few to a dozen to hundreds of thousands. And you want to make sure you find yourself in a group, in a community that allows you to be successful. And I know out there in this audience, there have been times when you've scratched your head and said, I'm just on the wrong team. I'm with the wrong group. I'm not gelling. I'm not really able to be successful in the way that I know I can, in part because of the people around me. And so as you move through your career, you want to keep track of, be able to talk about who it is that you can work with the best so that you can communicate effectively how a certain environment might allow you to be the professional self that you want to be. And the way you get to that, the way I like to do that in literally a homework fashion or in a coaching session, is to just say, name the people in your past that you've enjoyed working with. It might actually, to our earlier question, be a team of volunteers you worked with on some activity. And sure enough, you found out that the energy level, the excitement for mission or for some good cause allowed you to be energized and work hard. And that's something that you can bring as you get to or get into the interview process as a way to showcase that, hey, you get excited about different things, you're driven. When you feel compelled by the people around you, your effort steps up, your interest level stays focused, and you really are able to work at a high level, be successful, and deliver what's being asked of you. All right, so we talked about identity, who am I? Community, who is it that I work with best? And making sure that we bring both of those to the job seeking, the job search process as part of how we communicate, talk to others about who we are and what it is we're looking for, where it is we see ourselves working next. So I'm going to open it up again to questions. We had that third one just before we stop, but as you think about these two elements, what comes to mind in terms of questions in order to make it your own, make it applicable to your career? Go ahead and let's take that third question.
It was actually just a response in agreement with your statement that volunteer work is work.
Excellent. Volunteer work is work. Usually what I often hear from a coaching session or a group when we talk about community is, how do you discuss a difficult situation where perhaps you weren't in the right community, and yet that question is put to you in an interview about a past job, perhaps why did you leave a past job, etc. And what I encourage people to think about and answer those tough questions is to recognize that we are not all perfect human beings, that a lot of what's happening in an interview process is the interviewer, the recruiter, the hiring manager is trying to understand whether or not you know yourself well. You know what you're capable of. You know what needs to be around you for you to succeed. And so when you've had a difficult experience, it's important to step back from it and ask yourself, why was that difficult? Did I in fact have a challenging colleague or coworker that pushed me or made it hard for me to be successful? And it's fair to admit that in a work environment. You don't want to say you failed necessarily, but you certainly can admit that some of the challenges in a past role had to do with the team, how well it functioned, your ability to function within that team, and your honesty about what makes you successful, what you're good at. You're this analytical type of person and you're very detail oriented. And it seemed that you were working with someone who was very general and very loose with respect to timelines, and that frustrated you. That's perfectly fine. Companies can appreciate you knowing and understanding what allows you to work well and then communicate or converse with you about that. I see a fourth question in the chat stream. Can we go ahead and take that?
Oh, just a response saying that you preempted the question they were about to ask and answered it for them.
Excellent, excellent. Another thing on community, again, and let's talk about it in the context of interviewing. So we talked about struggling, and often you're asked in an interview, what questions do you have for me? And so community is a good element in which to bring a question to the interview. Asking the hiring manager or the HR person, can you tell me a little bit more about the people on the team, their background, what that team is composed of, how big is it, what is the frequency or I call it cadence, with which the team is busy and then slows down and then is busy again. You see this in retail environments with seasonality. You see this in service industries and often in manufacturing where you're building something for a certain time of year. So with community, you can ask the question and you're thinking to yourself, how am I going to use these elements? Well, could you tell me, Mr. Hiring Manager, a little bit more about the team, its makeup? Am I a female professional walking onto a team or an interest in joining a team of all men in their 20s? And here I am, a mom with children in their teens, and I want to be in an environment that I'm comfortable in, okay? Is this environment, is this community diverse? Because I'm a professional, I'm diverse, or I'm from a particular ethnic or religious background, and I want to be comfortable in my job. And so can you tell me more about the people in the group and in the company that I'm going to work with? So you want to be able to use community not only as a way of describing how you have been in the past successful and what was around you, but also as an element and a tool to engage the company, the employer, the hiring manager, the HR person to learn more about what this company is, who's there, how do they work, and is that right for you? There are times in your career and in your life where you need to get a job and you don't have the luxury of turning down any role, and you're doing everything you can to be that candidate that they make an offer to. But you've got to keep in mind that, quite frankly, they want to know as much about you, and they're evaluating you on how you ask questions and want to know more about the company. So it's important that you use these elements both to describe and to frame yourself, as well as to ask questions and learn more about the company itself. Okay, that's identity, that's community. Let's now move on to necessity. I just see the 4 number there in chat, so I think we're caught up on questions. So I'm going to move to the next element, and that's necessity. I talked about it at the outset. What do I need from a company besides a paycheck? This is important. Often when I work with a client, the first thing we do is I ask them, just list all the things that you need in life right now, besides a paycheck from a company. And that can include a broad range. I need flexibility in my schedule because I have an elder care responsibility for a parent, or I have very young children whose days are structured and I need to be available, things like that. I want to be sure that this opportunity presents me with an advancement path. I want to grow in my career. I'm early in my career. I want to develop skills. There are times when we want to be sure that this company and this opportunity is going to expose us to the leadership team, both formally and informally, because we want to know who's quote unquote running the company and also showcase our own ability. We don't want a role that hides us in a corner and doesn't allow us to move around the company. I want to collaborate and be in a cross-functional role. What are the most pressing things in your life, both professionally and personally, that are going to impact how well you can do in a job? And you want to be sure you have those in mind and are able to talk about some of those in the interview process, in a networking process. I had a client say to me one time, what I need more than anything else is a steady job. It's a job that's going to go a while, that's going to last, and I'm going to get paid and I'm comfortable. And I said, that's perfect. You want a steady job. That's different from a paycheck. That's knowing, hey, Mr. Employer, this role, how long can I see this role going uninterrupted? Am I being put in a position where I need to perform at a level in advance or and be given that opportunity, or this is a relatively short-term role on some particular project, and once that project is complete, I might find myself in a difficult situation where I'm going to be laid off. Work is challenging, companies grow and shrink, and we're often not in a position to control those decisions, but we want to be sure we understand what is it that the company is offering to me. Like community, this is a great place, a great framework element to ask questions. When you get put with that, what can I tell you about the company? What questions do you have for me? Necessity is a good element from which to bring a question. Is this role one where I'm going to be able to advance, and over what time frame can I advance? Is this company offering a broad suite of benefits beyond simply health and dental and eye? Is there maternity, paternity leave? Do I have a benefit that allows me to take care of an elder parent? Do I have the kind of flexibility in my sick and personal days, or days that I don't have to name them, where I can take some time off because I've got a child who's struggling at school, or I've got some things in my life that I need to attend to? Necessity is another good element that's the foundation for asking questions of a company, so that it's clear when you're talking to HR, to a recruiter, to the hiring manager, you're really thinking through whether or not this is the right role for you. Ideally, you want to be able to align what you need with what the company needs, because quite frankly, job descriptions, a job posting is a reflection of a company having needs. They need to tackle some challenge, some problem, reach some milestone. And in order to address that need, they've concluded they need a human resource versus perhaps capital, money, to just pay for something. So they have needs, the company have needs, and you have needs. And ideally in that interview process, in that discussion, in a networking session, you're trying to align those needs. Do both of you need the other, so to speak? All right, that's necessity. Any questions that come out of that? I'll take a break and see from our audience what's come to mind. Any hands raised?
No hands, but all of this just sort of reminds me, I follow Allison Green's Ask a Manager online. Yep. And a lot of her philosophy is that you are interviewing the job as much as they are interviewing you. And it seems like all of these pieces will help you identify what you want from the job, as well as how to prepare for what they want from you.
Exactly. And often we go in feeling a bit anxious about our interview process, You know, am I right for this company? And quite frankly, while the nature of the interview process is the company interviewing you, you are very much trying to figure out, hey, is this the right place for me? Those of us who are moving, transitioning, switching careers, and we're thinking about it while we're in our current job, are often in a position where we're interviewing the company. What do I need from this next role? I need to build skill. I need to change the current career path that I'm on. I need to be able to showcase my ability and advance. I'm stuck where I'm at. That's something I hear often from clients I work with. I'm stuck. I want to know that this company is going to meet me where I am and provide or address the needs that I have, as much as I'm going to address their needs. They need another person on their marketing team. They need someone else in their organization to help with a lot of the analysis that they're doing on their e-commerce business. So you want to keep in mind, again, this is a framework. You want to have, as part of your presenting yourself professionally, keep in mind that it's as much about what you need as it is about what the company needs. All right, let's move on to Horizon, our fourth element, and wrap up the elements themselves so that we can move into some more tactical discussion. Horizon, where do I see myself at the apex, at the top of my career? What comes to mind that symbolizes success? What next step or steps am I going to take to have a career that's full for me? Why does that matter? Because we all have gotten this question in an interview. Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Okay. Now, our gut response, our natural response is, well, I see myself really successful at this particular company. But the reality is, a stronger answer to that question is to quickly turn around and talk about the path you're on, the things you're trying to do, the fact that through the interview process, you've learned a lot about the company, and the company will help you move down your career path and allow you to achieve the success you're interested in achieving professionally. I had a client who really wanted to get to a point where he could start a company similar to the company that he worked for to serve a select need within the government, okay? And so for him, the horizon was to be the CEO or the head of a small company with a number of competitors that he knew, but he wanted to be in that market and wanted to do exactly that. And that's not unusual. Some of you might want to get into retail, work in a large retailer, because one day you want to have your own store, or you want to work in a retailer in their e-commerce business because one day you want to start an e-commerce business. As long as you're able to describe for the audience, the interviewer, that you see yourself headed in a certain direction, and that time spent at this company allows you to move in that direction, then this becomes a good fit. Because honestly, HR, recruiters, all today know that an employee is likely to be there for an average amount of time based on the company, and they're trying to select those individuals for whom this role is what that individual thinks of as a great next step, a good direction for them to head in, and they want to do this for a period of time, okay? So it's important to be able to articulate that what success means to you, what you see as your horizon, along with what you need from a company, who it is that you work with best, and at this stage, at this place in your life, who are you professionally? All right, those are the 4 career elements. Again, they're a framework, and so you're learning how to answer questions in an interview or in a networking session in ways that have structure, in ways that to the audience, to the interviewer, showcase your understanding of who you are, what it takes for you to be successful, what you want from a company, and the direction that you're going in life. And that creates a really whole candidate, a well-understood candidate that's imminently hireable and can come on board and add value to the company in ways that the company knows will be good for both the employee and the company. Those are the 4 elements. I don't see a new, that number hasn't ticked up yet, but I will stop and ask if there are any questions, anything that's popped up into your mind. Please feel free to ask now before we move into the next section. It's okay. All right.
I'm sorry, we do have a question.
Go ahead. Oh, I see. Yep.
What do you do if you don't know enough about the career path that you're on and you don't know what options there are for Apex?
So often this is what I hear from younger professionals. So I won't bias my answer by saying this is just young professionals, but it's certainly where the question comes to be most often. It's not unusual to know entirely sort of where you're headed or what success means to you. Sometimes we reach points in our career where we really are curious as to sort of what is professional happiness. When you don't know what the apex of your career is at this time, I think you want to bring that thought closer to, okay, what would I like to do next to really kickstart this next phase in my career? And that often goes back to, how do I best describe who I am and what skills I have? Because I'd like to use them in a certain way in this new area or in this new direction. You shouldn't worry, or you shouldn't be concerned that you don't know your horizon. It isn't something that everybody automatically has, but it is something that is helpful in presenting the entire you in a process, in interviewing, etc. And when you don't know that, when you're not sure, think about some of the things that you're curious about. Oh, I really would like to transition my career toward healthcare, toward fitness, toward maybe the new roles that are starting that we're seeing on the internet with internet companies or tech companies, but I'm not sure right now. And so it's okay to say, I'm thinking about these different career paths, and I've honed a certain set of skills that today I believe would allow me to try 1 or 2 different things. It's not a negative or a knock on you that you don't have an ultimate or an apex in your career, but you should have some idea of what you're curious about, or some of the things that might drive you to describe your skills well, and then talk to the individuals about what you might do, or how might this particular company in this path you've chosen line up with the skills that you have, that the things that you want to do, the things that you're curious about, okay? And it's perfectly okay. I've actually talked with people late career who feel as though they reached a point in one career, it wasn't what they considered success, and now they're interested in transitioning or moving in a different direction. And we work really closely on, what have you experienced so far? Can you break those down to identify yourself? And then once you've done that, when you look out at options and opportunities or things you might consider, how well in your mind does that skill set apply to those different opportunities, those options, all right? Knowing yourself better allows you to pursue things that you're interested in and ask questions and maybe settle on one, but it's okay if you don't have it down pat or rock solid at this stage. All right, let's move into the technical. This part of, or tactical, this part of the presentation is a bit more tactical, a bit more oriented toward active things you can do immediately. I talked about early on being asked questions about challenges. Behavioral questions are the types of questions you will definitely get as someone who's interviewing for management roles, for manager roles. They often ask them even for entry-level roles, in part because they require you to tell a story. And this framework helps you to craft those stories, and then tell that story. Often you're asked about strengths or weaknesses, about successes or failures. The interviewer says, tell me a time when, and it's meant to uncover whether you are aware of your own ability, your ability to manage work or others, how you function in an environment, and when you've not been successful, what do you do? The key is crafting the language that you're going to use over and over again. All right. You want to be able to tell those stories easily and comfortably. A negative in an interview is when you're asked a behavioral question. For some reason, you pause, you look at the floor, you look at the ceiling, you're struggling with coming up with an answer. And to the interviewer, what that means is that you're not really self-aware, and they're concerned that someone who's coming in and managing doesn't really understand themselves well enough, okay? So the reason we've gone through that framework is to help you craft that story. Have in your resume, have in your bio, different times in your career where you've been successful or where you've produced a result that you're proud of, and maybe some aspect of it you struggled with, but it's something you can tell a story about. It's not the story. It's not you're able to talk for 2 minutes. It's actually, I learned something having had this experience. I'd like to tell you about it and tell you what I've learned and how it's really changed me. And now that I'm changed from having had that experience, I'm a stronger professional. I'm able to deal with those circumstances in work because I understand who I am and what I'm able to do. And I understand my capabilities, my limits, quite frankly, where and when I'm at my best, and how best I might manage that environment or add value in that environment. When the last bullet there, the key is crafting the language. Where I see interviewees struggle the most in behavioral questions when I do mock interviews is that they focus solely on trying to tell this story and never get to what it meant to them, what they learned from it, what the takeaway was, what the residual, what stayed with you and now is part of your professional makeup. It's not about length of story. It has more to do with what experience did you have that changed you in some way professionally, and now that changed professional is better, is more capable, can do more things, okay? Behavioral questions happen quite a bit. I work with MBAs. They get them literally the entire interview process. You have to be ready for it. Don't get caught off guard. A good way to tell a behavioral question is it doesn't have a static answer that any of the interviewers would know. Instead, it's particular to you. And they usually start with or ask about a time or an experience in your past versus a number or a quantitative accomplishment. All right, behavioral questions and preparing for those. One of the things that I talk quite a bit with the people that I work with is offense versus defense, interviewing and networking conversations, and how to stay on the offense. Keep the conversation focused on the future and what's ahead for you and what you know is ahead for the company, or what you learn is ahead for the company, because you're in interviewing and talking about yourself and the skills you have and how those are going to be applied to the next job that you're taking. So to that earlier point about folks who are transitioning, often you're stuck on the defense. Why do you want to change careers? What is it that you did before? How's that relevant? You're trying as best as you can, and the interview process is naturally a defensive posture that you're meant to take to shift to an offensive stance or shift to the offense and talk about now and what's ahead, using your past only as facts to support what's ahead for you, okay? So an example of that is being asked, how is it that moving from this industry to our industry is going to be, or why are you interested in moving from your industry to this industry, and how is that of value to this company? Well, I've gotten from my past strong analytical skills. I've worked on big teams, I've worked on small teams, and I've worked independently. I've presented to leadership, and some of my written work has been used in decision-making positions. And when I've interviewed and looked at your job description, I've realized that those skills are applicable in this role. And so I'm confident that I can fit the role, do that work, and be very successful, even though I'm going from this industry to another industry. They're not very different when I look at the skills I'm going to need. And quite frankly, the industry itself is something where in my past, I've been successful learning quickly and adapting. And so I'm comfortable and confident moving in this direction. In the information age, what we're in right now, this technological age, the bulk of us are actually developing transferable skills that we can use in different industries. We are not sheet metal workers necessarily, or we are not pinned in one particular industry. I had a nurse ask me, well, I'm a nurse. How do I take those skills to another industry? Quite frankly, you're good with people, you have attention to detail, you work under pressure, you understand large organization and process, service delivery, a number of things. A host of new technologies exist in healthcare. You can take a lot of that and bring that to your next job. So part of the challenge with articulating who you are and where you're going, being on the offense versus defending your past, is recognizing, like we talked about earlier, who am I and how do I really detail those skills in my identity statement, my declarative and my narrative, that allows others to understand how it is that I'm going to be successful in the next role for me. Okay, I'm going to take a break and take a question if there's one out there.
A question for you from me just about informational interviews, because you've kind of touched on a few parts of those, and how can those fit into, especially if you're transitioning careers? I know those can be a little tricky because, of course, you're asking somebody to take time, and it's not the same as network because you're not trying to, capitalize on the relationship in the same way. So how do you do an effective informational interview session?
Perfect question. So in an informational interview, you are asking for someone's time. And so that's all you should ask of them, okay? As hard as you can, try to make sure that you've opened up a request for someone's time, and then they need not do anything other than provide you with a little bit of time. Next, because we've gone through this framework, bring a good, strong set of questions that this person could potentially answer based solely on their experience there at the company. We talked about community questions. We talked about necessity questions. Bring to that informational interview a willingness to converse as much as a set of questions that you have, and balance that out so that the person feels as though they're helping you, even though this wasn't hey, can you take my resume and shop it around. Informational interviews, I would argue, are in fact a combination of networking and job seeking. You want that person that you went to for the informational interview to get to know you as well as possible. And again, this is structuring how you talk to people so that they can subconsciously or without prompting begin to imagine, think about, see you in the organization and know where in the organization you might fit, and be able to say, again, without prompting, some of the questions you asked, and as I get to know you better, really put you in this role or in this place in our company. Hey, perhaps you should talk to my colleague. Another thing in informational interviews is exit an interview with another name of someone to talk to. Okay, you're not trying to leave a resume behind. You're not trying to get in the back door and go to HR. You're trying to learn about the company. And success is having another person to talk to. As a colleague, can you refer me to somebody else so that you get more insight from someone internal about what's going on at that company? That's important because the more you know about what's happening in that company from an insider, the better you can gauge whether or not this particular role that's being posted is good for you, or for that matter, having one or two conversations. You can come back later and say, I really appreciate having gotten time from you. I recently saw this new opening in the role, and I wondered if you had any thoughts or a minute to discuss it with me so that I can determine for myself whether this is the right role. You really are trying to build what I call promoters in your network, people who know you well enough that can think and act on your behalf without prompting. Promoters comes from Net Promoter Score, which is a measure of the consumers and what they say about a company. And so with that informational interview, You are trying to both learn and showcase who you are to this person, with the end goal of them knowing you well, you knowing the company well, and potentially getting an opportunity to talk to someone else in the company, which helps build reference and helps build an understanding of the company. All right, awesome question. I love that one. All right, here it is. Net promoters in your network. It comes from Net Promoter Score. It really is percentage of customers likely to rate the company highly. But when you think about it in terms of yourself, Net Promoters know your career elements and will recommend you without prompting. So think about how you're using LinkedIn today, and you have all these people you're connected to. Can you ask yourself, how many of them are promoters? How many of them know you well or have talked to you and really understand you? Because that's what's important about building a network versus just having a lot of connections. Build Net Promoters in your network. For those of you who are in a job and often ask, how do I network within my company? This is part of that. Do people in your organization, whether you work with them or not, do they know you well? Not just your manager, not just the colleague, but others around the company, so that over time, when opportunities come up, your name comes to mind, right? Build Net Promoters in your network, where you work, at the companies you're interested in, so that your job search becomes that much easier, because people already know who you are, can think about you, or when they hear from you, know you and say, yeah, that actually might be a good role for you. I'll put you in touch with the person in whose group that role is, before you jump into the interview and hiring process, to help build you as a candidate before you go and talk to HR, right? Net Promoters, a good way of thinking about, I'm connected with 1,000 people, but there are about 50 people who are my promoters, okay? Last one is resume versus LinkedIn. I talked a little bit about this in the context of offense versus defense. Your resume looks in the past. Your LinkedIn profile, and in particular that about section, and now the new featured section, should really talk about or articulate who you are and where you want to go professionally, and spotlight what's of interest to you. Okay, cover letters, emails, direct messages, link those two together. So again, think about your resume as a snapshot of my past, and a good resume summarizes it well, lists the skills that you've obtained as part of your career past, and maybe even includes 1 or 2 career highlights to help the reader, the HR person, the hiring manager, know a little bit more about you beyond just the names of companies and the titles. And then you want to use LinkedIn or any online bio or any online profile. You're seeing them now in Slack channels. You're seeing them now in social media like Clubhouse or Discord, or some of these new social media platforms that are popping up that are industry vertical. Make sure that those profiles, along with LinkedIn, which is the dominant one, present you and what's ahead for you. Anybody on this call who goes and looks at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see a few things that do that for me. First and foremost, my profile includes a quote, which kind of humanizes me, really lets people think about or know about what and how I think about management, leadership, etc. Then I have a declarative and a narrative, like we talked about in identity. I list out skills and specialties, so it's easy for the skimmer to see those. And then I even show some of the things that I dabble in, like startups and some things that caught my attention that I pay attention to. Even a little bit of humor in there. There's a line that says, I'm a career coach and I'm good at it, sort of tongue in cheek. That's a really whole profile, a really whole about section that lets somebody understand who I am, where I'm at, and get to know me a little bit better before they meet me in real life, in person. And now it's easier for us to talk. They can ask me questions about that. They feel like they know me better. There's a picture of me there. I've talked about how I present myself in the market, okay? Resume versus LinkedIn, it's important that those two complement each other. One is your past brought forward, and one is your present extended into the future. And when you think about them in that way, they work in concert for you when you're interviewing, when you're talking to someone. Believe you me, companies are looking at LinkedIn profiles of all the candidates that they're bringing into final rounds, and they need to find you online professionally. And when they don't, or they don't find a good example, that does not bode well. That does not look good for you. All right. Wow. We quickly got to the top of the hour. I'm going to pause. I have a little bit extra time, so we're not going to hang up just yet to answer any questions. We've talked about a number of things. I really want you to feel free and just see if maybe there's a question you have that applies particularly to you that you want to ask, and go ahead and ask those questions.
Well, while we're waiting for people in the chat to add their questions, I've heard a number of different opinions on personal websites in addition to LinkedIn. What are your thoughts on those?
Repeat that again, a number of personal websites?
Yeah, personal websites that are just sort of, this is me, this is my career path, kind of an expanded version of LinkedIn in a different platform almost.
So while personal websites are good, especially for someone who's in a form of professional services or has a side gig, the reality is that there are hundreds of millions of websites, and getting attention to your personal website is going to be Herculean. So it's unlikely that individuals will find it without some prompting. So the reason you want to use LinkedIn is it's accepted as a professional platform where we present ourselves, okay? A personal website is not a bad thing. Quite frankly, it's a little bit of extra content and material. In my mind, as a coach, I would encourage you to put your personal website link into your LinkedIn profile as part of the featured section, or quite frankly, somewhere prominently in your profile so that I can find it, all right? That is, again, a way in which you use an online profile to work in concert with your very traditional resume. All of us on this call understand that resumes have been around for quite a long time. If you didn't know, it's a legal document. So quite frankly, you have to abide by the rule of law around it. It has to be truthful. And so quite frankly, that resume can easily be complemented with some things in your life and in your career that are less about where you worked, the role you had, and the dates, and are more about who am I now? How do I think? What do I imagine for myself? Where am I going? Where do I want to get to over what time? What excites me? How do I think professionally, right? All things that are difficult to capture in a resume. We don't use cover letters like we used to, quite frankly, although we know that sites that ask for a cover letter optional, you should definitely provide one because that's a filtering mechanism. But we don't use a lot of the traditional tools anymore the way we did in the past. So we need to use contemporary tools to really showcase who we are, present ourselves, and really give people a whole picture. All right. Awesome. Really good. Really good.
Looks like we have a few people dropping off. Someone letting us know they had to head out. So I wanted to go ahead and pop in the chat the link if you'd like to register for future sessions with Mark, as well as for our entrepreneurship workshop. I'm also adding in there, before we have anybody else leave us today, the program evaluation for the library. So if you'd like to share your thoughts with us and any ideas for future programs, as well as whether or not you'd like to join our mailing list, please feel free to fill that out. That will direct you to a new page. So please fill that out once you are done with being here with us today. And I would like to invite anybody else to put any additional questions in the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. This has been just tremendous fun. One of my joys in professional career is just doing workshops like this. It's a ton of fun. Like I said, while I work primarily with MBA candidates and professionals in management, I enjoy, quite frankly, a great deal more working with younger professionals and just professionals from all walks of life, looking for a little bit of extra, a little bit of help pursuing their career. So thanks again. Please do come again. We're going to do a few of these. And we're going to do the entrepreneurship workshop, which is another fun thing I like to do. So I want to say thanks to everyone for joining us. Thank you for the Framingham Library for really, pulling something like this together. The Downtown U, that's awesome. And hopefully we'll see more of you again soon, as well as some of your friends. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Thank you, Mark.
All righty. Bye now.